1939 had been a financial and artistic high point for Hollywood. The year produced some of the most memorable movies of all time. But the Depression decade of the 1930s had not been easy, and moguls and movie stars faced the 1940s with uncertainty. It would be a decade that began with a world war and record box office, but end with one of the greatest challenges Hollywood ever faced. In 1940, 20th Century Fox released The Grapes of Wrath, based on the sad and stirring novel by John Steinbeck. With vivid images and powerful emotion, it captured on screen the devastating impact of the Depression on American life. It was also another example of producer Darryl Zanuck's unusual willingness to take on tough subjects and go his own way.
He always felt that movies had a bigger place in everybody's existence and lives, and it was like literature that would last forever, long after he was gone or anybody who had anything to do with it was gone. And he listened to himself. He didn't pay much attention to the others.
As director, Zanuck chose Hollywood veteran John Ford. Working within the Moguls' tightly controlled studio system, Ford made successful movies, but most importantly, he came in on time and often under budget. That assured his independence. Once, when a producer dared to show up on his set, the crusty director asked, "Don't you have an office?" Film by film, Ford was creating a narrative vision of American history that was, to many, more influential than the real thing. Henry Fonda, a young actor who'd come to Hollywood from the Broadway stage in 1935, starred as the ex-convict hero of The Grapes of Wrath. Fonda's career showed that star power could be more than glamour and celebrity. He embodied a quiet but determined sincerity that offered audiences a reassuring sense that America was an essentially decent and hopeful place, even in the face of adversity and injustice. In a time when protest and populist revolution were in the air, Hollywood movies could suggest a sense of harsh reality, but in the end usually traded stirring sentiment for a call to action.
We keep a-comin'. We're the people that live. They can't wipe us out, they can't lick us. We'll go on forever, Pa, 'cause we're the people.
Along with reflections of the people and places of the real world, movie audiences were more attracted to playful optimism and youthful energy. In 1939, a personification of those qualities arrived in Hollywood in the fleshy form of a theatrical prodigy, 24-year-old Orson Welles.
Everything he touched, he transformed. He was the one great director of radio. He was an extraordinary theater director. He was an extraordinary film director. Everybody says Citizen Kane's the best movie ever made. He made it when he was 25. Co-wrote it, directed it, produced it, starred in it.
Welles was a Hollywood outsider, but his success in the theater and radio gave him the kind of notoriety that small-scale studio RKO thought just might draw audience interest and, more important, money at the box office. Given unprecedented independence, Welles was wise enough to recognize that studio heads had power, but the success of a movie also rested with talented and creative men and women who worked in the assembly lines of the Hollywood image factories. He joined forces with writer Herman Mankiewicz, a hard-bitten Hollywood pro whose years of churning out bankable scripts gave him big paychecks and a serious drinking problem. Also on his team were the inventive Academy Award-winning cinematographer Greg Toland and a skilled and enthusiastic 26-year-old editor, Robert Wise. Like Welles, Toland and Wise were eager to break out of studio straitjackets and try new things. A thinly veiled biography of William Randolph Hearst, Citizen Kane, was audacious, if not foolhardy.
Toast, Jedediah, to love on my terms. Those are the only terms anybody ever knows.
Hearst was a pioneering studio owner, and his long-term relationship with actress Marion Davies was well known in Hollywood. Hearst's media empire wielded enormous influence, providing the publicity that the Moguls craved. This 1929 telegram from the chief ordered one of his editors to provide liberal publicity and a kindly review for a Buster Keaton picture. The Hearst press could also spread the kind of scandal that ended the career of comedian Fatty Arbuckle. Citizen Kane wasn't a big-budget picture, but William Randolph Hearst and his mogul friends in Hollywood began to pay close attention. And everybody thought, well, he's shown as a tycoon, but a magnificent tycoon who changed American journalism and so forth. What's he complaining about? Rosebud.
What's Rosebud?
That's what he said when he died.
Rosebud. And that was his pet name for a part of the anatomy of his girlfriend. And he knew perfectly well it had to come from somebody who knew them very well. And he suspected the writer, Herman Mankiewicz. Under outside attack, Hollywood power rallied around its own. Citizen Kane was hardly complete before a campaign led by Louis B. Mayer was launched to halt its release. RKO refused to be intimidated, but big studio control over theaters made sure Welles's film was rarely screened. For a time, any mention of Citizen Kane and RKO were banned from the vast Hearst press. But even that couldn't stop its ultimate influence. Orson Welles had glimpsed the future of Hollywood power.
It is the beginnings of everything that will change in American cinema, because it is the film, just as Welles is the filmmaker, who will become the patron saint of director's cinema, independent cinema, artistic cinema, cinema that flies in the face of the studio system and the factory. It is the film that has influenced probably more young filmmakers, not just in America, but all over the world.
It would take years before the influence of Citizen Kane would finally sink in. Orson Welles began a long and frustrating career as the ultimate Hollywood outsider. "I started at the top and worked down," he said later. But in the early 1940s, the controversy over Citizen Kane was insignificant compared with far more catastrophic conflicts. Since 1939, war had been raging in Europe, but nearly 80% of Americans wanted no part of it. Neither did the majority of Hollywood movie makers, except one. In 1940, Charlie Chaplin stood virtually alone when he dared to ridicule Hitler and Mussolini in The Great Dictator.
The Great Dictator was one of Chaplin's great triumphs because when he decided he wanted to talk, he truly had something to say. What he's saying is, this is not Satan. This is not some supernatural figure that we're up against. This is a clown. He's a fraud. Are we really going to allow him to take over Europe? The courage of that film is something, and more than the courage, you can watch it today and still be just dazzled by the nerviness of that.
Among the Moguls, that kind of courage was in short supply. With anti-Semitism on the rise, it was a conflictful time for the Jewish leaders of Hollywood.